Absolution, the 101st Doctor Who main range Big Finish release, first released in 4 parts across CD and download in October of 2007, and written by Scott Alan Woodard. Now, this would also be the final story for C'Rizz, voiced by Conrad Westmaas, as this story would end with the character's death. So, sorry if you don't want spoilers of this, I'm afraid I have just spoiled it, but go away and listen first. Now, the Doctor, voiced once again by Paul McGann, and his companions, Charlie Pollard, voiced by India Fisher, and C'Rizz, voiced by Conrad Westmaas, they're aboard the TARDIS when seemingly something goes wrong. And C'Rizz had been in his room looking through some of his items, and one of the items that Charlie asked about was something called the Absolver, a Utermison piece of, I'm not sure if it's tech or it's just a glass ball or whatever, but the Absolver contains the voices of the absolved, and when she ends up touching it, the TARDIS ends up getting stuck in a dead zone of space, or a forbidden zone, with a planet called Utebedon Taria. And above the planet of Utebedon Taria is a spaceship graveyard full of a load of dead or missing ships. Managing to make their way to Utebedon Taria, the Doctor and Charlie are separated from C'Rizz, and they end up encountering several characters, including a man named Abaresh, leader of the Outlands, voiced by Robert Glenister, Cocothis, a high priest, voiced by Christopher Villiers, and Lelanthia, a scientist and the daughter of Cocothis, voiced by Natalie Mendoza. Now, Abaresh is the leader of the Outlands, and essentially Utebedon Taria, it's effectively a slice of hell. Like fire, brimstone, stone, all the areas, and the leaders of the Outlands, they want to kind of break back into the great kind of temple and seize control of Utebedon Taria. And Abaresh wants to kind of manipulate C'Rizz so that he might ultimately become the Grand Absolver and lead the armies of hell, effectively. Now, one thing I do quickly want to mention about his voice actor, Robert Glenister, is that Robert Glenister is actually a case of an actor who would come back to Doctor Who. He voiced a couple of characters in Big Finish, but he would also then later portray the historical scientist Thomas Edison in the 2020 13th Doctor story, Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. Yeah, nice bit of information for you. Ultimately, the High Priest, Cocothis, reveals that he and a group of other scientists had once looked into exploring dimensional engineering. However, the experiments ended up going wrong, and he ended up firing the scientists over it because, well, the scientist was sleeping with his wife. To which, yeah. Ultimately, this is a story, kind of grand story of kind of death and hell and fighting against it and the like. But then it does lead to arguably a very heartbreaking moment, because C'Rizz ends up becoming the Absolver and kind of looking like he might be able to lead the armies, and the Doctor and Charlie, seemingly at first, they believe they're going to have to die at the hands of C'Rizz, but then C'Rizz ultimately decides to absorb the genetic assimilator in order to basically kill himself but save his friends. Like, he doesn't want the Doctor and Charlie to die, so he ultimately sacrificed himself that he might, with the hope that he might be reunited with his dead wife Lyda, who of course he lost very early into his run with the Doctor and Charlie. And Abaresh had told C'Rizz through his manipulation that if C'Rizz had stayed in his Divergent universe, he could have eventually become a god. But ultimately, being with the Doctor and Charlie, he changed C'Rizz. And ultimately, when he does ultimately kind of fade to dust, it is a very sad moment. But then it does also set up the next Doctor Who Big Finish story, which I will be getting to shortly. Because as the Doctor and Charlie made their way back to the TARDIS, the Doctor says that now maybe everything can go back to normal. And Charlie ends up looking at him as though the Doctor isn't mad, like he doesn't have a heart. It's like he just saw his friend die in front of him. He seemingly doesn't care, to which the Doctor says, I've had friends before, I've seen a lot of people die, and Charlie just still looks at him like the Doctor isn't human, which of course he isn't. But I do like to believe that maybe this sort of moment, this sort of look from Charlie, is what can influence some of the Doctor's decisions when he lost companions later down the line. Like, when he lost the likes of Rose and Donna, why he ultimately chose to travel alone for a while, or when he lost the Ponds and decided to exile himself to Victorian Britain until he found Clara. I'd like to think that this is the point when the Doctor truly started to gain some humanity, and as Charlie tells him that if the Doctor was going to be this way, then she wants to go home. She wants to go back to 1930, back to the wreck of the R101. Just, she wants to leave. Which will, of course, set up the next Doctor Who Big Finish story, which I'm hoping to review shortly, The Girl Who Never Was. And this marks the end of C'Rizz, to which I'll admit I didn't possibly look at him as much as I did Charlie, but still, he was a character who was there. He was present with the Doctor, and he made himself known, and you grew to like him as a character. So to suddenly have him die, he joins the hands of a few Doctor Who companions over the years who have met their end. People like Adric and Katarina, Sarah Kingdom. Companions who travelled with the Doctor but then ultimately died. So it does leave you feeling a little hollow. And anyway, the next story, as I said, The Girl Who Never Was, I'll get to that one shortly. Anyway, what do you think of Absolution? Let me know down below in the comments. Anyway, until next time, see ya.